And yet another Trump administration official, check it out, targeted by left-wing protesters at his home. This is the video. White House policy advisor and immigration hawk Stephen Miller, the focus of a demonstration dubbed Work, Not Walls. As for the wall itself, can Congress pull out a last-minute deal to build it before it's too late and the government shuts down? And later, President Trump's former fixer sentenced to jail. Now, Democrats are picking up on special counsel Robert Mueller's charges, saying hush money payments are an impeachable offense for President Trump, but is any of it actually illegal? Plus, newly released footage shows the last time a missing 29-year-old mother was seen in public. Police are hoping this video sheds new light on the Colorado mystery, and authorities are asking for your help. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. We've got team coverage tonight. Rick Leventhal following multiple leads in the New York investigation of Michael Cohen. But we begin with Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry and the latest fight over the border wall funding. Good evening, Ed.
Great to see you, Shannon. Republican John Kennedy of Louisiana usually cuts to the chase with a pithy way of summing up the madness around here. Tonight, he's declaring President Trump is not just as serious as a heart attack. When it comes to a partial government shutdown, Kennedy said the commander-in-chief is as serious as 4 heart attacks and a stroke. His point being the president was not bluffing at that tense meeting with Democrats Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer when he drew a line in the sand over $5 billion for the wall. Pelosi will not budge beyond $1.6 billion for general border security. Remember, the president vowed he could get House Republicans to pass a standalone bill with $5 billion. And Pelosi mocked him and declared, go do it. Well, many pundits have been claiming she had the upper hand in those talks, except breaking tonight, House Republicans are starting to put together a short-term spending bill that could keep the government open with Republican-only votes. The bill would have the $5 billion in wall funding the president wants, fund other federal agencies into January, get them past Christmas, billions in aid after wildfires in the West. And House also could vote as soon as Thursday, but there is an uncertain fate, of course, in the Senate where you need 60 votes. Now, some Democrats have been remarkably blunt in recent days about admitting they want no money at all for the wall, even as they also claim they want border security. And they also are throwing around some wild accusations that the president is really motivated by racism. Watch.
We're for $0 in border wall funding. Now, we obviously support money for security measures at the border, as we always have, and so we're not averse to that. But we don't want to go down the road of putting, $50 million in there, and then they say, oh, we've already started the wall.
Donald Trump is fixated on the southern border, as he was the day that he announced this campaign. It is not about securing the borders. It is about xenophobic, racist, bigoted beliefs that he holds.
How can you vote for $25 billion for a wall/border security in February of this year and say that the president's doing something unfair by asking for $5 billion versus $1.6? The caravan has exposed problems along the border. We need to address those problems.
This fight coming as liberal protesters, as you mentioned at the top, brought what they called a queer dance party to the Washington condo building of White House Senior Advisor Stephen Miller. They went after his role in shaping the president's immigration policies. Of course, the event, called Work, Not Walls, is upset about the treatment of migrants at the southern border. Now, Lindsey Graham, who you heard from a moment ago, said Republicans need to stick to policy and hammer home a simple message. Does America need more money for border security or less? He's betting most Americans will say more. Though the clock is ticking, there'll be a partial shutdown without a deal in just a few days, Shannon.
We are standing by at Henry. Thank you very much.
Just you.
All right, shortly after the president's former lawyer was sentenced, federal prosecutors also announced they have reached a deal not to prosecute a tabloid publisher over its role in paying a woman who claimed she had a lengthy affair with then businessman Donald Trump. Correspondent Rick Leventhal was at Cohen's sentencing this morning. He is tracking all of these threads. He's got the latest. Hey, Rick.
And Shannon, the Publishers American Media, or AMI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office revealed the AMI deal this afternoon in a press release after the sentencing of Michael Cohen, who apologized in court for his involvement in handling payments to women to keep them quiet about alleged affairs with Donald Trump. One of those women, former Playboy playmate Karen McDougal, was paid $150,000 for her story by AMI, the publisher of the Nashville Enquirer. But the Enquirer buried the story instead, a practice known as catch and kill. The deal was orchestrated in part by AMI's owner, David Pecker, who's a good friend of the president's, and he's been cooperating with U.S. attorneys as part of the non-prosecution agreement. AMI admits it made the payment to suppress a potentially harmful story and keep it from influencing the election, agreeing also to improve its practices to prevent future violations. Cohen, who showed up this morning with his wife, son, and daughter, had 3 rows of family and friends in the courtroom, telling the judge during a nearly 10-minute statement that blind loyalty to this man, Donald Trump, led me to choose a path of darkness over light, and that time and again I felt it necessary to cover up for his dirty deeds rather than listen to my own moral compass. Cohen's voice broke when he apologized to his family, and there were tears among them after the sentence was handed down: 36 months in federal prison, 3 years supervised probation, restitution to the IRS of $1.39 million, forfeit of a $500,000 loan, and $100,000 in fines. But Cohen can spend the holidays with his family. He doesn't have to voluntarily surrender for prison until March 6th of next year, and he could get out early if he cooperates further with the feds. And now we're hearing about the possibility of another sweeping probe by the newly elected New York Attorney General, Letitia James, who says she will launch sweeping investigations into President Trump, his finances, his family, and anyone in his circle who may have violated the law. So it seems pretty clear today's sentencing of the president's former fixer is not the end of the book. It may not even be the end of one of the chapters, Shannon.
I think you're right, Rick. Thank you very much. Okay, so Democrats now focusing on 3 possible lines of impeachment: collusion, obstruction of justice, and now all this talk about potential campaign finance violations. So let's bring in tonight's Legal Eagles to discuss. National Security Attorney Bradley Moss and former Chief Counsel to the Senate Majority Leader Alex Vogel. Great to have both of you here tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Alex, I'll start with you. What do you make of this? The incoming New York Attorney General says we're going after anyone and everyone connected to Trump.
It's problematic, frankly. It seems to me that any attorney general, regardless of what state you're from, you should take the facts as you find them. And if you see something that needs to be investigated, you should do so. To come out publicly, name someone, and say, I'm going after them, is inherently problematic from a prosecutorial perspective, and that may come back to bite her in the end.
Well, and Brad, does it give the credence to the president's arguments that there are witch hunts, these are fishing expeditions, that there are people who are just politically motivated to come after him?
Whether there's any merit to that, yes, it does serve kind of that narrative the president pushes, that this is all political, it's all some witch hunt going after him, regardless of the facts. I certainly wasn't a big fan of the way the new Attorney General described that. I wish you would have described it more narrowly in terms of here's the specific crimes we believe we have evidence to already pursue, here's how we're going to pursue them, instead of this wide-ranging, we're going after everything the Trump family, including some issues that I'm not even sure would have come under her authority and her purview as a state Attorney General.
Okay, so let's talk about the campaign finance violations or alleged violations, because this is what's getting so much attention now with Michael Cohen, and now with the tabloid publishing group also reaching a deal with the federal prosecutors in New York. There's this whole question about the statutory language, which says if the expense would have existed irrespective of the election campaign, that could be a different story. And a lot of people say, listen, if you're a successful businessman and you have women making allegations of one-night stands or affairs, this is something you would have wanted to quiet up anyway. It's not necessarily connected only to a campaign.
That's right, and it did get a lot of play today. There's a couple of interesting things about this. Number one, the Southern District is now the bad cop and Mueller's actually the good cop. No one saw that coming. On this issue of irrespective, this language, up until the AMI stuff came out today, the president and his legal team actually had a pretty good argument to make, I'll call it the John Edwards defense, which was there are other motivating factors besides elections that drove this payment, and you alluded to some of the obvious ones. The problem is twofold. One, in the Edwards case, the jury instruction actually said if any one of those is campaign related, any one of those purposes, the government's proved its case. That's number one. Number two, the AMI piece came out today. And it's not clear to me why it came out when it did. Frankly, the Southern District has done a very good job putting the president in a box by doing this, because what is clear from that document is AMI is saying not only was it campaign related, but there were campaign people in the room. So if you're trying to argue there was no campaign purpose whatsoever, why was there a campaign person in the room? I would argue that the AMI development today was actually a lot more significant legally than Mr. Cohen's sentencing, unless you're Michael Cohen, because you're the one looking at 36 months. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Brad, now we have Democrats saying, okay, this is possibly an impeachable offense now. I mean, they're gearing up. This includes Jerry Nadler, who is going to be the incoming chair of the House Judiciary Committee. That's where this whole thing would start. Is it a double-edged sword for the Democrats? Because we have Mark Thiessen on the other night. He said their base is going to demand that they move forward with impeachment. If it falls apart because the Senate, you don't get 2/3 of people, it's a failure then. And does that only then fire up the president's base and those who say, I'm going to do everything I can in 2020 now to make sure they don't get to him?
Correct. I mean, let's put it really clear. If the Democrats pursue this on an impeachment angle before they've got all their ducks in the row, before Mueller's issued his report, even if they get impeachment articles through the House, which I'm sure they'd be able to do, if this dies in the Senate, it's an easy win for the president. He can use that as a cudgel in 2020. The only way, I know the Democratic base is going to have to just chill out for 5 minutes, let the prosecutors finish what they're doing in Southern District of New York, let Mueller finish his stuff, and the only way they should be moving on this, the only way that they should actually start pursuing impeachment is if Mueller brings in something additional. If all this is campaign finance, yes, it's an impeachable offense. I don't think it's something that the Democrats are going to want to try to pursue.
And before we run out of time, I want to get you both to weigh in on the same question. This idea of introducing legislation to stay the statute of limitations on some of these things so that even if the president gets elected to another term, so he's got 6 more years in. When he's done, they would be waiting for him, these potential crimes.
Right. So, look, I think it's a bad idea. I think you should do criminal justice-related issues, not with any specific defendant in mind, which is what the case is here. If they want to revisit the statute of limitations, that's fine. I think what they're really getting at is this Office of Legal Counsel argument position about not indicting a sitting president. I saw Senator Blumenthal today said he was going to ask for a new opinion. I think he can ask for all the opinions he wants. That's fundamentally different than going out and trying to change the statute just to capture the president.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of it either in terms of the idea of just subtly changing that just for one particular case. There's 2 options. They can seek a sealed indictment to toll the statute and to eliminate the immediate issue, or they can simply say, look, this is our institutional policy, refer it to Congress, and Congress does what it does or doesn't do is the way it was outlined in Article 1.
All right, Bradley and Alex, thank you for lending us your legal talents.
Absolutely.
Great to have you with us tonight. All right. A group of Central American migrants at the southern border near California is reportedly demanding money or expedited entry into the U.S., or they're going to go away or not go away. Also tonight, customs officials have released some interesting new numbers. Casey Stiegel has more from Texas. Hey, Casey.
Well, Shannon, that report comes from a newspaper out of San Diego. The Union Tribune reports that some of the migrants in this group of about 100 protesters or so were demanding either, quote, President Trump let them into the country or give them $50,000 per person to go home. We can tell you the group did indeed march in the streets of Tijuana yesterday toward the U.S. consulate office, and there were parts of the caravan that took part of this. But Mexican police in riot gear got involved and kept the peace. This comes on the heels of newly released information from U.S. Customs and Border Protection showing a 216% increase last month in family unit apprehensions versus November the year before. More than 11,000 arrested, and that is in just one sector known as the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. In addition to that, some 2,300 unaccompanied kids were apprehended in the same period, and once again in just one sector. It's unclear whether this will prompt the feds to possibly look at extending marching orders for U.S. troops who've been deployed across the region. With the holiday season approaching, the number of active duty soldiers was originally scheduled to go down somewhere around 3,000 compared to the nearly 5,500 who were part of the original mission to go in and assist U.S. Border Patrol agents on the ground. Shannon?
Casey Stiegel, thank you very much. Well, tonight, House Republicans on the Hill working to put together the votes were told to fulfill President Trump's request for $5 billion in border wall funding. One possible vehicle could be a short-term spending bill that expires in January, but includes funding for the wall and emergency disaster aid for the California wildfires. Keeping up the pressure, the president tweeting today, another very bad terror attack in France. We are going to strengthen our borders even more. Let's bring in Fox News contributor, former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Thomas Homan, and senior researcher on immigration and border issues for Human Rights Watch, Clara Long. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Thomas, what do you make of the president connecting the French terror attack to our border issues? Some people found that inappropriate.
I don't think it's inappropriate. Look, known or suspected terrorists are arrested trying to enter this country every day. And some do come to the southwest border. As the ICE director, I detained some of them that were arrested by the Border Patrol. So there are people that want to do harm to this country, enter the country illegally, many by air, many by, maritime, but some across that southern border. So it isn't so far-fetched that the president would say something like that.
All right, Clara, we heard the president talk about some numbers, recent numbers that he'd asked for research as he is looking at the wall. And we heard Congressman Jim Jordan, a Republican, tweet some of those out today. He said, walls work. These facts don't lie. Israel, illegal immigration down 99%. San Diego down 92%. El Paso down 95%. Tucson down 90. Yuma down 95. Let's build the border security wall. Hashtag do what we said. Your reaction?
Look, it's not surprising that we have more people crossing the border outside of ports of entry when the United States is metering very severely the number of people who can cross at legal ports of entry. Customs and Border Protection says that has something to do with capacity, but there doesn't appear to be good evidence coming out on the part of CBP that it actually has to do with capacity. Instead, it seems to be about decreasing the number of people who can seek asylum in the United States, which I'll say doesn't conform with the United States law or with the international obligations that we're adhering to under the Refugee Convention.
Well, Thomas, what do you make of that? Because that is something we constantly hear, that capacity is so low that the numbers, of course, are going to bottleneck at the border, and then people are going to come here illegally because they don't have another way to get here legally.
Well, first, let's not attack the United States. We welcome more immigrants, refugees in this country than any other country in the world, first of all. Second of all, yeah, they do meter these people in. Let's understand what's going on in San Ysidro Port of Entry. Over 100,000 people are processed to that port of entry every day. So they can certainly shut down legal trade and legal people coming into the United States and concentrate on this, So we have a choice to make. There's legal trade, there's legal business, there are people that are entering this country every day with a visa or some sort of documentation. 100,000 people a day. If you look at the 100 or so they admit to asylum seekers takes about 19% of that workforce. 19% of the workforce for less than 1% of the population come to the port of entry. The men and women of CBP is actually doing a pretty good job considering the amount of work that comes to the largest port of entry in the world.
I want to play something from Hogan Gidley from over at the White House talking about Democrats and where they stand on this issue of a border wall, which we saw the very heated discussion in the Oval Office yesterday, and obviously people digging in their heels publicly and privately over this issue. Here's Hogan Gidley.
They used to be on the right side of this. They voted themselves. Chuck Schumer, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton all voted for a border wall. They used to be for securing our borders. They are not for that anymore.
Clara, is it simply become political and about opposition to this president?
Look, everything's political these days, but the fact is that the border wall, there's not good evidence that a border wall is actually going to increase border security. And let me tell you, as a human rights organization, we're in support of the United States controlling and managing its borders. The question is, how do you invest to do that? And instead of investing in the appropriate resources to say, screen individually, because that's what's needed, as former Director Homan has pointed out, screening people individually so we can tell, so the United States can tell if someone poses a threat or if they have a legitimate asylum claim. Instead of investing in that, the government is proposing to invest in a wasteful initiative that wouldn't really solve the problems here.
Okay, Thomas, I want to get you to respond to something along those lines. A criticism from the ACLU talking about the work that's being done at the border. They say it is hurting innocent people. The headline of this article says President Trump is accelerating the militarization of the southwest border. It says Trump's dangerous promise of a 1,000-mile border wall is likely to cause migrant deaths and more human suffering, devastate the environment, waste taxpayer dollars, and damage border communities. Your response, sir.
Well, look, I started my 34 career as a Border Patrol agent, so I wore that uniform, worked at the line. What the president did was it was smart business what he did. 'Cause let me tell you, when they sent the military down there to do all the infrastructure work and to do the sensor monitor and the radar monitor, that put more of the green uniforms on that border. And what's happened? That pushed the cartels out of business. Cartels are upset right now because they can't move their product because with the additional security on the border, they're losing money. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you something about the case that just happened. The president tried to make these caravan go through port of entry saying, I'm not going to let you apply for asylum if you enter illegally. He was doing a good thing there, and of course he got overruled by a judge over in San Francisco. But let me tell you what that judge actually did. These caravans are going to be at a port of entry surrounded by federal agents to keep them safe. The women won't be raped, children won't be abused, they won't be robbed. And what this lawsuit actually did is saying, okay, it's okay if you enter illegally again, so let's go back into the hands of the criminal organizations.
Yeah, one thing we can agree on, I think, is that these cartels are very, very dangerous for innocent people, the ones who are actually just seeking a better life. All right, Clara and Thomas, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
We've got brand new Fox News polls tonight. President Trump's approval rating at the end of 2 years. Where does it?
X1. Just say Assassin's Creed Odyssey into your X1 voice remote to get your free code today.
We've got brand new Fox News polls for you tonight on President Trump's approval rating and possible 2020 Democratic presidential contenders. Trace Gallagher is here to break down all the numbers for you. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Shannon, let me start by giving you a sample of how the country feels about hot topics. Democrats are very concerned about climate change and gun laws. Republicans are very concerned about illegal immigration and the caravan. And both parties are very concerned about health care and political divisions. Overall, 46% of voters approve of the job President Trump is doing. 52% disapprove. Those numbers have barely budged all year long. In fact, back in January, it was an almost identical 45% approval versus 53% who did not approve. As for the Robert Mueller investigation, opinion really hasn't changed that much either. The majority of voters, 56%, still approve of the special counsel probe. 37% disapprove. But it's fascinating that now a record 48% of voters think the Trump campaign did coordinate with the Russians in 2016. Only 37% think there was no collusion. That's down 15 points from June of 2017. But 40% of voters still think it's unlikely that Mueller will find that Trump committed criminal or impeachable offenses. Pollsters say it's never a good sign when the Mueller probe is more popular than the president, which brings us to the president's re-election prospects. Only 39% of voters believe President Trump will be re-elected. 52% say he won't. So if most voters don't think President Trump will keep his job come 2020, who do they think will become the next president? Well, the top two choices by a mile, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. And tonight, our own Brett Baer asked Sanders when or if he plans to announce. Watch.
When you're going to take on Wall Street and you're going to take on the drug companies and take on the insurance companies, before I decide that I want to run, I got to make sure that there is that grassroots support. And that's what we're ascertaining. If there is, I'll run. If there isn't, I won't.
We should note Senators Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and Kamala Harris also made the list. Did not see Hillary Clinton's name. I was looking pretty deep in the list, didn't see that name on there at all. They were down below, well below Joe Biden.
Keep
and
scrolling
Bernie
on
Sanders.
down.
Keep looking.
All right. Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. All right, so as you just heard, former Vice President Joe Biden tops the Fox News poll of potential 2020 Democratic presidential contenders. And tonight, Biden is reportedly discussing his options with family and backers at a Washington gathering here in town. Correspondent Garrett Tenney has more on Biden's busy week.
A week after saying he would be the most qualified person in the country to be president, Joe Biden is back in D.C. tonight, meeting with some of his political advisors and hosting friends and longtime backers from key presidential primary states for an annual holiday reception, according to the Associated Press. As the latest Fox News poll shows, the 76-year-old would likely be a leading presidential candidate. Sources familiar with his thinking tell the AP Biden plans to hold family deliberations over the holidays to decide if he'll make a third run for the White House. It appears to have been a busy D.C. visit for Biden, running into another potential 2020 contender, Senator Kamala Harris, earlier today. Biden's been down this road before, dropping out of the 1988 campaign in a race haunted by allegations of plagiarism. And Biden's handling of the Anita Hill hearings in 1991, along with concerns about some of his public interactions with women, have led to recent headlines like Joe Biden 2020 is a terrible idea in a post-Weinstein America, and Joe Biden's Me Too problem. So Biden's by no means a lock, and this morning, former Obama Housing Secretary Julian Castro took a big step himself toward a possible run by forming a presidential exploratory committee, which allows him to start raising money ahead of upcoming visits to Iowa and New Hampshire.
I have had a very strong vision for the future of the country, and I'm going to spend the next few weeks traveling and listening to folks and getting a sense of where people are at, but I know where I'm leaning, for sure.
Tonight, yet another Democrat added their name to the more than 24 believed to be considering a run. Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
Yourself, are you running?
I'm seriously considering.
What would stop you?
I'm concerned about the direction of our country.
No, what would stop you from running?
I don't know. I'm thinking through very carefully.
As for Tom Steyer, the billionaire former hedge fund manager and liberal activist is also laying the groundwork for a 2020 run by posting a job listing on LinkedIn for state directors in New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, 3 key states that vote right after Iowa. Shannon?
Yes, they are. All right, Garrett Tenney, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right, Justice Kavanaugh's accuser, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, back in the... It is time now for tonight's Power Panel. We've got some great topics. Now, you remember before the break, we heard about former Vice President Joe Biden's big day. We know he's at the top of the Fox News poll with Democrats looking to 2020. So here to weigh in, Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, Vice President Mike Pence's former press secretary Mark Lauder, and White House correspondent for the Daily Caller, Sagar and Jetty. Welcome to all of you.
Thanks for having me, Shannon.
Hi, Shannon.
Okay, so let's talk about that, Leslie. You have Joe Biden, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, 2 old white dudes atop this 2020 Democrat field. And there's been so much about youth and diversity and intersectionality. Like, how does that work?
Well, as a Democrat, I do feel that those of us on the left want to see an old white guy in the office right now called Donald Trump become a one-term president. So it really doesn't matter the diversity, if you will, of the candidate. It matters the strength of the candidate being able to beat Donald Trump and make him a one-term president. I've said before on your show, I think Joe Biden is that candidate because I think he could embrace the working class in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And in addition to that, I think he could, with that no malarkey attitude verbally, I think he could give Trump a run for his money in sparring.
And, you know, Mark, he is very well loved. That's something we all, Uncle Joe, everybody really, especially when he has his own faux pas and gaffes, that people seem to be very forgiving of him. He's very lovable. They trust him. He's been good on foreign policy, or at least he has experience, you know, as a true statesman in some of these things. But we all know that when somebody actually starts running, the knives come out from your own party and from externally, too. I mean, do you think that will happen to him as much of a beloved character as he is?
Absolutely. You're going to have 30, 40 Democrats running, and what they're all going to do is run to as far left as they can go, because that's how you're going to get the nomination. Vice President Biden is not, the far left progressive candidate, but he's going to face a bunch of far left progressive candidates. He'll be dragged that way, and the voters will insist that he go that way to get their votes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One of the other things that came up in our Fox News polling, the president's handling of different issues. At the top of the list for him was the economy. 50% approve, 43% disapprove. That's one of the places where he's at a plus, Sagar, and it's something that we know a lot of voters respond to. If they're doing well, they have money in their pockets, they've got food on the table, the kids can go to college. That's something that really resonates when people finally decide to go to the ballot box.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we see a lot of the things that dominate the headlines here in Washington. They're not really the things that a lot of people care about. As long as, gas prices are decent, as long as they see the economy trending upwards, those are the things that they look for. And then they want to see where they can cut costs on maybe issues like health care. And then we have a few of the cultural things like immigration that they do end up caring about, or climate change in behalf of the Democrats, like was being talked about earlier. So as long as the economy stays steady, the president's probably going to be in pretty good shape heading into re-election.
Okay, so let's talk about cultural issues since you bring that up. I want to read a headline from lifenews.com. The headline is, Democrats introduce bill requiring U.S. to call abortion a human right. Now, this is referring to a report put together by the State Department. It says the Reproductive Rights or Human Rights Act would require the U.S. State Department to include abortion on demand and other reproductive rights in its annual human rights report. It's a reaction to the Trump administration, which earlier this year prioritized real human rights issues by removing references to so-called rights to abort an unborn child from the report. That's their characterization of it. Leslie, your response?
Well, first of all, it is Life News, and their characterization is not, in my opinion, and if you just look at what was there versus what's being asked to be put back, entirely accurate. This was part of the State Department. We're not saying abortion is a human right, but we are saying that women's rights are human rights, to quote Hillary Clinton, and furthermore, that a reproductive right is part of a woman's right because it's part of her body. Now, having said that, it's not just about abortion. It's not just about birth control. There are countries in this world that have forced abortions, forced sterilization. That all comes under the umbrella of reproductive rights, and we as a nation should be included and be in watch and be aware of and look at what the statistics are internationally with regard to those issues that surround women and their reproductive rights.
And Mark, my understanding is the State Department is going to be including those kinds of things like forced abortion and forced sterilization, but they draw the line at calling abortion on demand a, quote, right. They don't want to identify it that way in these State Department reports.
That's absolutely correct, because this administration is the most pro-life administration that we have seen in many generations. And there's no circumstance that I can see where this administration is going to say taking a human life is a human right. It's just morally offensive to even compare those two or to equate them. We will fight for women's rights and for refugees and to stop these forced sterilizations and abortions that are going on. We've done this over the course of generations, and we will continue to do that. But we draw the line at making abortion on demand a human right.
And Sagar, this is something the president really, the people who turned out to vote for him really counted on him to do this. And all the pro-life groups and advocates I know say this guy has been our biggest friend in the White House so far.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably going to, if this were to go anywhere, he would forcefully reject it. He knows that the evangelicals are a huge part of the reason that he's been put into the White House. You know, he said that he had a personal conversion to the pro-life issue some time ago, and he has really stood firm on this. And like you said, all of the pro-life groups that I speak to on a regular basis have told me that they are absolutely, you know, in any interest group that has supported this president, they are probably the ones who have come out the best in terms of this administration.
Now, we're going to talk a little bit later about this week that a number of them are very upset that he hasn't found a way to defund Planned Parenthood, and that's more on the Hill, and they're upset with lawmakers not getting it together on that. All right, one final topic I want to get you all to comment on this. This has to do with Sports Illustrated using Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, obviously the Justice Kavanaugh accuser, to present an award to a young woman, a lawyer, a former gymnast who stepped up and was one of the people to expose Larry Nassar, who has pled guilty to child porn charges and a number of sexual assaults. Beckett Adams, writing in the Washington Examiner, "What's wrong with you?" Sports Illustrated says, by trotting out Ford as some sort of celebrity abuse victim, the magazine has devalued its Inspiration of the Year trophy and the reason for its awarding far below what the subject matter deserves. It goes on to say, Sports Illustrated has cheapened the seriousness of the